Hello, and welcome to today's discussion with two incredible Mizna collaborators, artist and director Dina Amer, and scholar and screening committee member Adey Almohsen. I'm Lana Barqawi. I'm the executive director of Mizna. I'm here to introduce our guests today and tell you a bit about Mizna and the Arab Film Festival. For those of you who are unfamiliar with Mizna or our festival, we are an Arab and Southwest Asian and North African, or SWANA, run arts organization based in Minnesota in the United States. We do this work on the ancestral homelands of the Dakota and Ojibwe, and we acknowledge that our practices participate in the settler colonial project of the United States. On this land, we produce the annual Arab Film Festival, as well as a monthly film series and a literary and visual art journal, focusing on the work of SWANA artists. I use this acronym SWANA, which means Southwest Asia and North Africa. At Mizna, we like to use this term to try to draw out the complexity of the regions whose artists we represent. And we do this also as an intentional attempt to decolonize our spaces, refusing the colonial term, the Middle East. I use this as an example to situate the work that we do at Mizna and to give you some insight into the kind of questions we grapple with through art, literature, and film. To learn more, please visit our website at mizna.org. Today's conversation is focused on the work of Dina Amer, a filmmaker whose debut feature, You Resemble Me, is an official selection of our Twin Cities Arab Film Fest. And we're honored to share this film with our audience and to host Dina in this virtual discussion about her complicated and important film. Dina's work grapples with issues and questions that resonate with the work we do, and her film examines the boundaries between fact and fiction, history, and the present. As this year's festival also examines the experience of diaspora of Arab and SWANA artists and their stories, You Resemble Me tells a harrowing story of the impact such displacement can have on real people's lives. I'm happy now to introduce our guests and to let you hear more about the film from them. Dina Amer joins us today from London. She's an award-winning filmmaker and journalist. She helped produce the Oscar-nominated and Emmy award-winning documentary, The Square, which chronicled the Egyptian revolution from the front lines. Growing up between the US and Egypt, she strived to share nuanced human stories with a global audience. Before shifting to film, Dina was a celebrated journalist. She was on-air correspondent for Vice, including the Black Market series, where she uncovered the human trafficking of Syrian refugees and explored the underground economy of illegal Egypt-Gaza tunnels. Her written work has been published in the New York Times, CNN, and the Huffington Post. You Resemble Me is her debut, is her directorial debut. Dina will be in conversation with Adey Almohsen, a member of our screening committee. Thank you, Adey, for that. He's currently a Mellon postdoctoral fellow at Grinnell College in Iowa, where he teaches the history of the modern Middle East and North Africa. He's currently working on a book set to explore Palestinian intellectual history and its Arab discontents in the 1940s, 1950s, and 1960s across Amman, Baghdad, Beirut, Cairo, Damascus, Jerusalem, Khartoum, and beyond. It's my pleasure to welcome you two. I'm going to be turning off my screen and let the conversation begin.
Hey, Dina, thanks for coming.
Thank you. It's an honor to be in such good company. And it makes me proud as as an Egyptian American to see that there's such organizations that are really doing the work and the effort to bring community together and to also be unapologetic about standing up to colonialism, and backing up with academia and with really, it feels like, really important community building. So that's, it's my honor. Thank you guys for having me.
Of course. Yeah, we thank Mizna and everyone, all the kind of the soldiers that are involved in making this happen. So I really appreciate them making Minneapolis and the Twin Cities such a hub for Arab culture. The programmers for this year included You Resemble Me, obviously because they're dealing with this theme of the diaspora. And you specifically deal with the question of this Moroccan French woman living in France. So we were just kind of to get the kind of the biographical elements out of the way. So where were you drawn to the story? How did it capture something for you about living in the diaspora? And what aspects of the story that led you to make this film? So kind of just covering that biographical ground, if you don't mind.
Absolutely. It's amazing that you already kind of said the catchphrase, which is like the diaspora. Like,
Yeah.
I'm not French, but I am Arab, and I am American, and I grew up as diaspora, and so I could relate directly to the character Hasna that the film is centered around, whose family immigrated from Morocco to France, because I understand kind of the complexity of trying to find unity within yourself amongst the different pieces of your identity of being a woman, being Middle Eastern, being Muslim, trying to be modern and still have a sense of who you are and your roots, and especially having the world tell you that these pieces are too contradictory and they can't come together in harmony. And so really the birthing of the project happened when I was actually in France on the ground as a journalist reporting for Vice News shortly after the Paris attacks in November 2015. There was an explosion at the scene of like a police raid, where police were closing in on what was thought to be the mastermind of the attacks, and this young woman Hasna was in that apartment building that the police were conducting a raid on, and there's a viral video of her screaming at the top of her lungs, "Please let me jump." One officer says, "Where's your boyfriend?" referring to the mastermind of the attacks, and she screams, "He's not my boyfriend, please let me jump." And then an explosion goes off. Now the police confirmed to all the media at the scene that she was a suicide bomber, and that she had detonated that bomb. I reported that just like every other media outlet, and it traveled the world. A few days later, when the police actually surveyed the area properly, they realized it could not have been her to set off the bomb. It was someone else. And so I felt terrible about contributing to a fake news headline. So I went to Aulnay-sous-Bois, the hood that her family lives in and that she grew up in, to find her mother. And her mother turned away every single filmmaker or journalist who was interested in speaking to her, except for me. And it's really because she felt like I resembled her daughter. She told me, you guys, you laugh the same way and you walk the same way and you kind of look alike. And this mother had abandoned her daughter. She had abandoned Hasna. And so there was a sense of catharsis in allowing me into their story. And really the journey began from that point, from a point of resemblance between myself and this woman who had been completely dehumanized by the news and called a suicide bomber. And there was very little nuance to the reporting of like how she arrived there. Instead, she was just demonized, and there was a lot of like racism, there was misogyny, and I felt as a woman and as an Arab Muslim woman, that it was my responsibility in a way. It was even beyond responsibility. I kind of had no choice. I was pulled into this like rabbit hole, and I really realized that, Hasna didn't come out of the womb wanting to join a violent organization. She was at one point, she was just a little girl, like her mother showed me a picture of Hasna as a child. She said, "This is my daughter, not the woman with the niqab on that looks, that everyone's calling a female suicide bomber in the news." Like, she was just my little girl, and so it was important for me to really embed with that community. I did over 360 hours of interviews with the family, with the community, with everyone who ever touched Hasna's life, closely. And from those interviews, I wrote the script. I cast the movie mostly street casting, mostly people who had never acted before. And I brought her story to life.
Absolutely, and that comes about really powerfully in the film. That's why, I don't know, it just kind of stays with you whenever you watch it. Just speaking of the acting, you just mentioned that she said that you resemble me, which is like that you resemble her daughter. So that's one interesting choice you do in the movie, is you have this three women and three girls that are representing Hasna. So I don't know, if it seems to me that it's hinting like at this kind of fractured identity, and how then eventually she was portrayed as different people in the media. So could you tell us about this choice to depict this story in such a way with three different actors, including yourself? And how did this plan emerge? Was this what you planned from the get-go, or did it come about more organically?
You know, the media, which is considered like the mecca for reporting on the terror story, yeah, it's sensationalized and fictitious and problematic, and actually inspires other individuals who feel lost and disenchanted to feel like, you know, they can exist through a copycat, through a copycat attack, or so like in many ways, like the media is actually like an engine for inspiring other people to feel like this is a legitimate path, joining a radical group, and like it can inspire young people to go down that route. And they, they had, as you said, reported at three different women as Hasna, and three different faces of women. And there was very little done to really rectify that. Like the damage was done. Those other two women who were implicated in the attack and called Hasna, including her sister and another Moroccan woman, still till today live with a grave amount of fear, and whether it was and felt very kind of exposed, and there was something I felt that was inherently racist about that, that like, oh, they all kind of look the same, and like this dehumanization of the Arab female, and so I want to take that media mistake and flip it on its head and allow three women to step into her shoes, to give us a glimpse into the woman that she could have been, that she tried to become, and that most importantly of all, that she was struggling with her mental health. She was struggling with dissociation, and like the main issue, the main kind of like centerpiece of why she radicalized is that she had this dissociation, this like shape-shifting quality of that, that comes with sometimes being a third culture kid, you know what I mean? And feeling like you're trying to fit in to like a dominant Western society, and that you have to kind of, you have to code switch, or you have to become someone else in order to belong, and that after a while, it can lead to a sense of like schizophrenia, where you don't feel like you belong anywhere. And so it was really important for me to confuse, for the audience to see that she was shape-shifting. And that was like the reason why she kind of flung herself in the arms of a group like, ISIS. And that like, there's no formula to radicalization. Like every time, you try to peg it to a broken family or unemployment issues or, lack of education, whatever, you find someone who didn't struggle with any of that and still radicalized. And like the one common denominator is that all the individuals who radicalize across the spectrum, by the way, of any ideology, even like white supremacy groups, is individuals with fractured identities who are looking for a sense of direction and looking for a clear sense of direction, a clear sense of who they are. And so it was important for me to also show the audience that Hasna is every woman also in another respect. Like she has universal needs of wanting to feel belonging, wanting to feel loved and considered, dignity, right? And like when that is not given to a human being, sometimes they can go down a very violent, dark path in life. And so those were really the reasons why I chose to create this, to cast three women and have them step into the shoes of Hasna.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And your answer kind of, in some ways, kind of connects and partly answers my next question. So, but I'll ask it. So the film deals with the problems of identity annihilation on a very personal level, and just kind of to use the cliched, in many ways, you show that the personal is political ultimately. Just to use the kind of that, and how this alienation is also, as this personal alienation is a product of these social and political arrangements that exist in a country like France, and their prejudicial effects on the life of someone like Hasna. So my question is, how much of the film is a critique of that kind of system and systematic racism and everyday misogyny and violence women like Hasna face in this supposedly free society of France? And then how much of that is a rationalization of such a seemingly radical choice as Hasna? So that's just, I don't know. That's,
Yeah, I mean, I think you can't peg the reason why she radicalized to one single thing. You can't say, well, France is so racist, and even like, you know, historically with colonialism and, you know, and how bloody the occupation of Algeria or humiliating it was in Morocco. Like that's what, you know, and how Hasna 3 generations in still feels humiliated by the state. Of course, these are all factors, absolutely. Yeah. And the Muslim community in France is struggling. These are all facts, you know what I mean? And if you're visibly Muslim and you wear the veil, like there's rampant discrimination, and you know, against employment, and like there's like wild laws. Like I think they were like, you know, they're discussing a law of like how a mother can't go a mother who wears the veil can't go pick up her child from school because that's imposing religion in a you know, in an educational space, like, you know, and it's against laïcité, which is like a French ideal of secularism, and in some ways laïcité is like is very fundamentalist, is like religiously anti-religion, you know, and with a specificity against Islam, you know, and like, and so of course there are problems on a systemic level in France and also across the Western world. I mean, if you see, the ISIS propaganda videos are composed of, you know, images of Western hegemony and war in the Middle East, you know, and like going into countries like Afghanistan and Iraq, and like, you know, the unresolved injustice in Palestine. Like they're using real archival, you know, say, hey, these are criminal acts, and the so-called guardians of justice are criminals, and like, if you feel like you're lost, guess what? Look in the mirror. They are attacking us, and the best way to fight back is like to join us and pick up a gun, you know. So there is the West is complicit, absolutely, but also we can't just like let it, like there's other components, there's ingredients, like, you know, her broken family, like the fact that she was sexually assaulted, the fact that she was living on the street. There's many things that came together that created this rotten stew. And there's also personal choice, you know, and that can't be just like erased. Like we're telling, like the reason why I signed up and put all these years in is never to justify Hasna's interest in joining a group like ISIS. No, she was fascinated by a violent group and she wanted to join. And I think at the last minute when she wanted to jump off, and it was too late. You know what I mean? It was too late to leave when she realized that this was actually a nightmare and not going to be, you know, the answer, you know, not the dream that was like promised to her, right? So like, I think that there's many ingredients that came together. There's also personal responsibility that has to be attached, but we need to, the point is, like, we have to look at all the ingredients as a society. We have to examine them all, you know, because there's not just one, there's many Hasnas in the world. There are many people who are feeling, you know, very abandoned and very angry, and wanting to find a way, a place to kind of pour that anger into. And so we have no choice, even for national security purposes, purely, even if we don't have any compassion, just to create a safer society. we have to have the courage to look deeply into the story.
Speaking of it, I mean, yeah, because I think I really, when I was on the screening committee, and when I first saw it, and the really movie resonated with me personally, because I actually had a cousin who joined ISIS and he got killed in Iraq. And I personally, I guess when I was around, I kind of shunned the family just because I didn't rationalize the choice myself. And then over the years, obviously, as I reflected, and obviously watching this movie has made me kind of, come to realize that, people making choices is as important as personal choices. It's still, it has to be contextualized. And even the most horrendous ones and radicalization is neither innate nor an overnight process. So I can't really imagine what he went through, because I was close to him as a child growing up, but I kind of, ever since we disconnected later on. So, but this is the thing. I personally think you're making a very timely critique and kind of looking at this period that we kind of more or less passed or still kind of going through, this early 2010s and after the Arab Spring and so on and so forth. My question is, I think you did an excellent job in terms of humanizing and adding some nuance to this debate about radicalization and Islamization, rather than kind of picking them as just as enemies of humanity and civilization. My question is, how would you respond to someone who would say, hey, like, you're kind of humanizing a set of individuals we're supposed to shun for their violent acts? So how would you respond to that? And like I said, I'm just being a bit of a devil's advocate right now. So yeah. You're muted. Sorry, Dina, you're muted.
Okay, sorry. No, I would say that, again, it's for national security purposes that we have to look at these, the story of Hasna and the story of your cousin and the countless others who have been, brainwashed and sucked into radical groups. And I'd also say that there's a double standard and there's a racism in the critique of not affording that to, people of color who were seduced into ISIS. Because when there's a mass shooting and the shooter is white, whether it's in the US or in Europe, the media goes,
Sorry, your voice is cutting. I couldn't hear the last part. Your voice became tinny towards the last minute or so.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, I was saying, as I was saying, like that, we don't. There's a level of racism in the critique that we shouldn't take the time to look at the lives of people who were seduced into ISIS. People of color who were, or seduced into any violent crime. We should just shun them as criminals and monsters who made a choice. Because when attacks happen, mass shootings anywhere in the world, and the shooter is white, the first thing that the media jumps to is their mental health, how they were raised, images of them as children. So it's about time we afford that level of humanity and compassion to all individuals who have been entangled in criminal either acts or, Hassan didn't even kill anyone. She didn't shoot anyone. She didn't stop the bomb. But yes, she was radicalized. She was interested in going to Syria. She did help her cousin find that hideout. And I would also say that that we have to have the courage to look at the things that scare us the most as a society, in order if we want to be able to ask the right questions to solve it. If just shunning someone isn't going to make the problem go away. So what's going to make the problem go away is actually having the courage to look at it deeply and examine it and understand and see, and to understand that fundamentally this person is a human being, factually. So and there's many of them. So how can we stop others from falling into the same trap?
No, absolutely. And I just want to kind of just building on, obviously you're doing this as you said, as an Arab American woman. And obviously there's a very strong feminist critique that is embedded in the movie, and that I appreciate. So is that, and because she saw it as like even a whore, and just because she's kind of suffering from the stigmatization of being a whore, either when like how the French or people, and she's free and she's still treated as a whore, but then when she wants to somehow repent, she's still considered as a whore. So I'm just wondering if you could talk us through a bit of the kind of the feminist critique and lens with which you've approached her life. I mean, obviously her own experience kind of demands such, like you said, she was sexually assaulted. She went through a lot of shit by her being a woman, and especially an Arab woman in France. So could you just talk us through a little bit about that and your choices and critique through making the movie?
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like in France, there's such a focus on the Muslim woman and what they're allowed to wear and what they can't wear legally. Like the burqa is banned there legally, and yet Arab women are always like sexualized and exotic, made into these exotic beings, and I feel like, to be honest, there's also pressure from the Muslim community itself, where you can feel as a woman living in the West, coming from some background, that from both sides, like it's like, who do you want me to be? Because you're putting a lot of pressure and demands on what it means to be a good woman, and it's like, can I just exist on my own terms? How about that? And I feel like that's what drives people crazy, is when you put all this pressure on them from any group, saying like, this is what it looks like to be part of our society, be part of our community. And it's very rigid, and especially for women, it can be very unfair, and there'll be a double standard that is very different from what's expected of women, And so I thought it was I'm like, the problem here for me is, on a societal level, a woman like Hasna was not allowed to exist on her own terms. As a Muslim French woman, she should be able to decide what that means to her, unapologetically. When you're in harmony with your identity, when you reconcile those pieces, that's what you're able to do. You don't get to, for example, it's like when I did research with some more conservative community members in France who are Muslim and quite Wahhabi, and we're like, oh no, you're not Muslim because you have nail polish on. You're not Muslim because you don't wear the veil. You know what I mean? It's like, who are you to say if I'm Muslim or not? It's not part of the problem. So this film was really about pointing fingers at everyone who led to this, this like this rotten stew that created this headline.
No, I agree, and I like that. This is one thing that really made me really like the film, is that you're pointing fingers at everyone, the system in France, French society, but also equally at our own society. And obviously, just speaking, because you said you interviewed the mother, and the portrayal of the mother is obviously, is not great. So I'm just wondering, how did she square that? Seeing her, how she's portrayed on screen, and then giving you access to her interviews. Like you said, you were the only one that have given you the time and space to talk to her. But then, like I said, I'm sure you're trying to stick to the circumstances of Hassan's life. Her portrayal was, obviously not great. It's because it was not great. So I'm just wondering how did that play out?
I showed the family to Hassan's, I showed the film to Hassan's family. Her sister Mary watched it. She cried. She thanked me. She's like, this is what you and your team have done, is, I feel like, angel work, because we brought justice to a false headline. I traveled the world. So we are so grateful. I showed it to her brother, I'm great. In so many ways, the family is the most important audience member, right? Because they gave me so much of their time and energy and entrusted me with this story. And so I'm very, very grateful and blessed to have received their support. Now, I didn't set out to demonize the mom. I mean, by any means, but I think the mom also is a complicated person who in some ways is a victim of her own story, and her own life, and what she had to deal with leaving Morocco and coming to France as an immigrant and barely speaking the language and dealing with a system that treated her like, subhuman, and and having 3 kids and struggling mentally also, and not having the support. So for me, it's yeah, there is a responsibility that the mother has, of course. There is, and I think, you know, that's also part of the story, like that, like I think there was a wound also in Hasna's heart that came from a familial level, and I'm not here to whitewash or sugarcoat. I'm just here to kind of just tell the story as it is.
That's one thing I really admire about your work. I'm just wondering now, just going another thing. Obviously, what were some of the choices you made? Because obviously you said you spent 368 hours interviewing, so you probably collected a lot of different strands of her life. Could you just tell me a little bit about, obviously, your choices as a director? What did you include? What did you exclude? Why did you exclude a couple things? Why did you include a couple things? We just want to know what's the process, because you probably have like a very detailed narrative of her life at hand, but you ended up producing it in an hour and a half. And then there is this, and how much of it is, because obviously what's interesting is this genre blending that you do with kind of narrative film kind of becomes in the end a documentary. So how much, yeah, so you kind of also are, in a way, for me at least, that's you kind of challenging this division between fact and fiction. So yeah, just walk us through some of that as well in terms of your choices, how much was fictionalized, how much was factual, and just do you mind just telling us a bit about that process?
No, of course. I mean, I realized this film in many ways, the story is like the Holy Grail, because people died, there's blood that has been spilled, real people's lives. And I can't just kind of like come in there and like quickly kind of like put out a story, if I was really going to take on this mission of understanding Hasna and how she arrived to this point of radicalization and how she's entangled in that headline, I needed to put in the time and the energy and the effort, and that was years. That was years of interviewing everyone in her circle. And those interviews turned into a script. And I mean, all the scenarios are true. She really lived in those circumstances. Now, of course, you bring actors, you bring dialogue, things will shift a few degrees. But it was important for me to have the film be a fiction film, like a narrative film, that only at the end you connect to the news and to the truth of it all, and you meet the real family, because I wanted you to be in Hasna's skin, in her shoes, and to feel her, and because she's no longer alive, that could only be done through a performance, through a really skilled actor. There's one main, Hasna, who like really took us through the complexity of her, and that was quite important to me. And also I realized I was doing something quite radical by even making this fictional and bringing actors and not just sticking to a pure documentary. I realized that the film industry is ready to celebrate narratives that are humanizing. Like, people have done terrible things in history, like Adolf Hitler, with with countless films about him, what's that film about something, Jojo Rabbit, you know what I mean, or all these other, or we can humanize like all kinds of killers, right, and bring them to the screen through actors. But like having a brown Muslim woman entangled in a terror headline, that was like the red line. We couldn't go there through fiction. I was like, no, we can go there and we should go there, and so that was very intentional.
No, absolutely. And I just want to ask you, you questioned like how this is a time, so your film has been produced by some really major names, Spike Lee, Spike Jonze, and Rez Ahmed. So I'm just wondering, yeah, how did that process, like how did the idea appeal to them, given that I'm thinking of all these three, at least especially Spike Jonze and Spike Lee, I don't know, they don't really work on anything related to the Middle East or so. Yeah, just wondering how you managed to appeal to them, and what was that like? Yeah.
So Spike Lee was my professor at NYU, and he read the earliest drafts on it of the script. And then Spike Jonze I met through Vice because he was a creative director at the company. And I came to him also very soon into me making this film. And he was a big mentor and guide. And Riz is a dear friend, you know, and this is very much it's in his kind of moral compass to have the audacity to bring representation to the screen beyond just, hi, I'm a Muslim and I'm just like you, like telling difficult stories and complicated stories about people from our community, you know? And it's interesting because I never would have thought in a million years I'd be interested in making a film in France or a film about terrorism. It just didn't speak to me personally, you know? But I really felt compelled because I felt like this film wasn't about terrorism in many ways. It was about a woman who was struggling with her identity, you know? And I could relate to that. That felt quite universal to me. That felt very personal to me. And from that jumping off point, like that's where I kind of fell in love with Hasna's story, you know. And the backdrop was this terror attack, but she could have gotten mixed up into gang culture. She could have gotten mixed up into like countless other it was a rotten stew that was bound to like go bad in something terrible, but like it just so happened to be an Islamic terror attack. You know what I mean? And that was what was important for me, to show how people among us who were once children and lovable and like how they can find themselves in these really difficult circumstances, making very difficult choices, and that was what was important to me, you know. That was what was important to me, bringing humanity to someone who is vilified and is not given a chance to exist as a human being.
Thank you. And one last thing is, again, playing a bit of a devil's advocate. So in the film, we kind of get those two ideal types of being an Arab in France, kind of the Hasna herself and all the stuff that she goes through, and eventually she radicalizes. But then you have kind of her sister or the French army recruiting officer. So it seems like there's like two modes of existence of being an Arab. So I'm just wondering if you could comment on that, if that is a possible critique you anticipate or something along these lines, because I'm just wondering if that kind of comes off as a bit dichotomous. Yeah.
I think that it's important to say that like you can grow up with the same circumstances, you know what I mean, or similar circumstances, and not make that choice. You know, like her sister didn't make that choice. Now, what's interesting though, her sister is equally fractured in a different way, which I think the film shows. Like she wants to look French and European and white at any cost. Got a nose job, like the way she speaks, the way she can, like she really just wanted to fit in and turn her back on the hood, on her Arab roots, and distance herself from her family, from her sister, only for it to implode back in her face when her sister died, because she got caught up into that headline and she was called just another Arab terrorist. You know what I mean? So like, no matter how much you try to fit in and integrate into the French society, in the end, you're just where you came from. You know what I mean? And the worst iteration of it, the worst typecast of it, you know? And that's what's heartbreaking. That's what I wanted the film to show. That even, look, Miriam, she followed all the rules. She tried to become like a French darling, a Parisian, like this image of a Parisian girl. Guess what? Doesn't matter. In the end, she was considered no different than her sister and called a terrorist across the world. So, and that drove her into her own psychosis. You know what I mean? And no one's calling her a victim in France today, even though she is. And with the army officer, like, there's also this desire when immigrants, come, when they immigrate to a country, to fit in and to integrate at all costs and to become European, become French, and be like, oh no, we don't speak Arabic here. So, and some might say, oh, that's they're integrating, that's a good thing, and some might say, actually, you're kind of selling out in a way. to belong. And how sad is it that this society that formerly colonized you and your ancestors isn't giving space for you to integrate the full entirety of who you are? Why can't you be Muslim and Arab and French? Why can't all those things coexist in harmony? Why are you forcing people in order to feel like they fit in? They have to like let go of something, or like in a very over the top extreme way, connect to some idea of the Middle East and some idea of Islam. Like that's what I was trying to show through the film.
No, I agree. And honestly, watching it, because I'm going to be teaching Fanon next week, French Fanon. And I couldn't help but kind of just resonated a lot with me just reading it. And I'm thinking like the thing you mentioned, like, I guess it kind of, Fanon says something like once a wog, always a wog, you know? So like, so that's the thing, that's the thing that happens with her sister almost. So and this is just a final question, and it's more interest. How does because they're divided at the foster house, they go through. So could you just let us know a little bit how, like, obviously we know how she gets to the point where the bombing happens, just this kind of intermediate period between them being separated as a child and then until we meet her at the end of the film. So where does she end up? What are some of her life choices and so on and so forth? Could you just because I'm just intrigued to know a little bit about Maryam.
You know what happened to Maryam on her journey, you mean?
Yeah.
So Maryam was sent to another home, and white French Catholic home, and she she really struggled to have any connection to her family, and she wanted to fit in, and really tried to become, as I said, this like white Parisian girl, modifying her face, the way she speaks, everything, the way she dresses, and it really didn't pay off, because of the way her sister died and how she was dragged into it, and her face was plastered all over the world, called the first female suicide bomber, which in of itself is a false headline. And what's really difficult is that I showed her the film. I went to show her the film before the film premiered in Venice. And she told me she had a baby, which I was really happy for her. But that's amazing, wow! And she's showing me images of her baby girl, and I was like, wow, like, where's your daughter? I want to meet her. And she's like, oh no, at birth the kid was taken away by the system, because ever since Hasna died, she has felt an immense sense of guilt and really been struggling, mentally. It's like almost like she relives the questions of the film or the scenes of the film in her mind every day, and so they took the child from her, and I was like so heartbroken. I was like, wow, I'm literally witnessing the cycle continue, this generational pain. And it became so clear, like, our mission as human beings is to break that generational trauma, and it's very hard. We could, like, Maryam used to say, like, I'm never gonna be like my mom. I'm never gonna, like, the way she hurt us, the way, like, you know what I mean? And it's like all of us in our own way can be like, we can like identify even consciously what it is that our parents, did that harmed us, and be like, I'm never gonna be that. And then one day wake up and look in the mirror and be like, oh wow, how did I become my mom? How did I become, you know what I mean? Or if you're a man, like, how did I become my dad? Like, how did I fall into that same trap? And it's because, like, there is this intergenerational trauma that is real, and like, I really believe more important than anything you achieve outwardly, it's like, how can you not repeat the same pattern?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, it's this foster system has been broken, and like you said, it continues to be a broken system. The foster infant adoption system in France and the United States, and pretty much in most places, to be honest. So, and I guess it's continuing. I guess we'll see. Hopefully, we'll see what happens to our daughter, but this trauma is gonna blend in eventually, unfortunately. I think I'm wrapped up with my questions, but I really appreciate the film. Like I said, it was touched me so personally and like emotionally, and it was just like I said, I didn't know about her, to be honest. I knew about the Bataclan November events and then kind of the mess that I didn't really. I guess when I was following this, I was still through that phase where I kind of completely dehumanized this based on my personal experience with my cousin. So I didn't bother to learn a lot about the attack. But then watching it, I kind of read up about her and about what happened. And it's just, so I really thank you for that. And yeah, just if you have any final comments or thoughts you'd like to share about.
Just thank you so much. This was a really enjoyable conversation. It's really refreshing to be able to speak to, you know, someone from, you know, someone who I feel I have a lot in common with, because you are also from the diaspora, and like, and it gives me a lot of hope, you know, when I see that there's like an Arab film festival in the U.S. and that there is, and that, you know, and I'm grateful that my film is a, you know, was selected. So thank you guys for bringing me into the loop.
It's easy to select it. It's really good. See, great job. Thank you.
Thank you guys. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dina and
Yes.
Adey. What a beautiful, moving, and thoughtful conversation. Thank you for sharing your heart and intellect with us. It's really a lot for us to think about and grapple with, and that it was handled with so much thought and care is incredible. So thank you so much.
Thank you. And please stay in touch. I feel like, I don't know, I feel intuitively we should remain in touch, you know? So, you know, it's yeah, please, let's find a way to continue the conversation in other ways.
I would love that, and we'll make that happen, Dina. Thank you so much. Maybe in a future year you can join us at the film festival.
Inshallah, inshallah.
Well,
all right, guys.
Thank you so much, and thanks everybody for tuning in.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.